Now hitting the button again. And we're back.
Are we?
Yeah, we're back, and you're sipping your tea.
Oh, yeah. That
There we
means
go.
I have to post another link to my Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm doing too.
Okay. Okay.
It's so lame. It's so lame. All right. Do you have the link?
Nationalism with China versus
Let me send it in.
President. Yeah, I got the link.
Oh,
Don't
okay, good.
worry.
Okay, good. That also means I have to go into my studio and delete the other one because it's useless. It's got the intro. That's about it.
Okay. And we can chat.
Live now. Okay, let me delete this
Three
other one.
person working. It's down to two. Okay, whatever.
Delete forever.
Let's start. Let's
Indeed.
go back to the
Back to the topic at hand. So we
yeah.
were talking about Trump and his nationalism and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
you wanted to go somewhere with it, I think, right?
Yeah, there's some similarity between how nationalism works in the United States and how it works in China.
How do you think? How do you think so?
How do I think so?
Yeah, like what's the similarities that you see?
What's the similarity? So let's start with the idea of make America great again.
Sure.
This sentiments that we used to be great and we are no longer great anymore. This is a very core part of China, actually. Chinese nationalism. It's not exactly the same. In China, the story is historically we were a great nation.
Okay.
I guess people can get behind that, like historically, a couple hundred years ago, a couple centuries ago, or maybe a millennium ago, we were like the greatest country in the world. We have this great inventions and all that stuff. That's taught to us in history. This is kind of similar to how you are educated in the United States. Like you get to learn about how United States is the greatest nation in the world, in which ways it's great.
That's true. And it used to be taught that way up until I want to say the 90s. And
Mm,
when Trump's referring to make America great again, it's not centuries old per se, because, I mean,
mm,
United States 250 plus years old. It's not that old. China's got
mm,
thousands of years of history
I
in
guess.
comparison. So um, our history is young, so young, in fact, that most of our early history can actually be found in photographs because,
Yeah.
well, photography was invented. So
Mm,
pretty close to the dawning of our era. Most of the stuff was still paint and whatnot, but everything from our
mm,
founding is we have duplicates, we have triplicates. Nothing's been destroyed because we've not been around long enough to destroy it, I guess you could say. So, but that's
mm.
changing here recently. A lot of people are just destroying statues for reasons makes no
Yeah,
sense.
we'll get to that later. I want to get to that
Mm.
actually.
Yeah.
But anyways, this really creates a sense of pride in your own nation.
Well, that's the
Like
idea.
as a Chinese person, going through the education system, you will be very proud of the country. And it's not only the old stuff we are taught to be proud of. Like there are recent stuff. I would say Huawei is one of the examples. Like we were the leaders in 5G technology, and the Chinese government makes a kind of a big deal out of it because we are leading the world. We are no longer the underdog. We are strong and united and all that stuff.
Mm.
So this kind of really strengthens their rule of the people because people are going to believe that the government is leading the country in a right direction. That's how we got to world first and all that stuff. And the Chinese state media is very keen on these things. So sometimes you can see it's really just a small record, but we were the world first, and they will make it head news,
Yeah,
kind of that kind of thing.
absolutely. Uh, I think there's some polar differences in
Okay.
the language, though, and that's why when you mentioned that on your thread, I disagreed because I was like, well, I can see where you're coming from,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because it's the one party nation, and the perception that I have of China, at least from a political standpoint, is they attempt to be extremely unified in everything that they do because of the one person party or one people's party, the Communist Party of China, CPP.
Oh, it's not a one person's party. Definitely not.
No, no, it
No.
really isn't. Like, because they introduced capitalism into their government, which kind of, I don't know if it corrupted their own idealism or not, but I think it's been
It
beneficial for
depends.
China.
Are you a Marxist or are you a capitalist?
Exactly. And I think it made China stronger, in my opinion, because it definitely put them in the position to be competitive around the world. And basically, I don't think there's an industry out there that's not dependent upon China in some fashion, at least for something that's made anywhere. Like, I can't think of it, maybe wood, like raw materials. Like, I was at the hardware store today, and we're debating on getting two different types of wood. One was primed, one wasn't. The one that
Hmm.
was not primed and the length we needed and whatnot was from Russia.
Hmm.
And the other one that we decided to go with was from Chile.
Hmm.
I mean, you can't get raw materials more than that, right? So with when it comes to electronic components for that, for an example, there isn't a chip alive that I don't think has been through China at least once. Just an
Now
example.
there, that's actually one of the key problems with China because we rely on TSMC, which is from Taiwan.
Mm,
That's actually a core problem with the U.S. trade war.
yeah, I could see that.
So China has to rely on the chip manufacturing on Taiwan.
Could that be one of the reasons that the Chinese government despises Taiwan at this point in time because they rely upon them?
No,
There's got a
that's
lot of
more of
history there.
another issue.
Yeah,
Taiwan is like a historical problem that's left like a leftover historical problem.
yeah. There, it's got a lot of baggage. I
The
know.
common rhetoric is we fought the Korean War. That's why we didn't get Taiwan back. We used our army to fight the Korean War. That's because we were preparing boats and all the stuff to liberate Taiwan. But
I
then
see.
Korean War happened.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's a whole different subject for a whole other story, I
Yeah.
guess. So, I think maybe I can see the similarities of what you were talking
Mm.
about with the nationalist view and the nationalist movement. Um, I think the difference is with perception. What Trump was meaning when he was talking about uh, make America great again and America first and all that fun stuff. And his perception is probably the same kind of glamorous perception that I had once upon a time, um, but has steadily gone downhill since probably 2000, I would say.
Hmm.
And that's was we were first to the moon. We were first to aerospace. We invented the light bulb. We're the first with electricity. We have a lot of firsts in our short little history, with a lot of baggage that goes with it. And then, in the 70s and 80s, we're the first to. I think we were the first equal rights for women. We weren't the first to free slavery. That was actually Britain that did that before us. We actually had to fight a war because people from the South decided to tie in their economic dependency upon slavery. So they couldn't run their own place because they didn't want to cut into their own profits and actually pay people a salary, so they just owned them instead. Kind of dirtbag way to do it, but I mean, that's what it was. But I think he's not referring about that stuff because that's the worst of us, I guess you could say. He's more referring about we used to be first in just about everything, highest industry, oil independence. The dot-com buzz was ours, internet, like all this stuff that we developed and put first. And now what do we got? Critical race theory, racism's all-time high, riots, gun violence everywhere. It's like we went steadily downhill since the 70s. And I would contribute a lot of that downhill momentum from divisive philosophy would be the easiest way for me to put it.
Philosophy.
Yeah, it's not science. It's not grounded in reality. It's not grounded in anything that one could measure. It's unfalsifiable, like a lot of religious claims are.
Are we talking about the left keep on inventing
Yeah.
new things to be angry about? That
Yeah,
kind
they,
of.
they just make up things and reuse words and change them because they feel like it. It's kind of annoying, actually. But it's not just that. Like he was combating with that for the 4 years that he was in office because he had 90, I think it was 96% negative coverage from our media. So it's not like we have state media here because they would have been kissing his butt for 4 years and saying how wonderful he was. It was quite the opposite. You were lucky to hear anything positive about Trump throughout that entire time. But fortunately for us, they weren't allowed to cancel him off the internet, so that gave him opportunity to say what he wanted to say. And unfortunately, he's got foot and mouth disease, as we call it here, which means he often speaks as if he has a foot in his own mouth. And it doesn't make any sense when he tries to speak. You listen to him and you're like, do you know how to construct a sentence without skipping between whatever thought you had at that second? You know, he had a very hard time communicating. Let's just put it that way. He was not very good, unless he had the teleprompters and he actually decided to read them. Then he was all right.
No, he has to actually decide to read them.
Yeah, well, when he ever decided to read the script, he wasn't so bad. But he went off script. Oh man, did he go off script? And it was horrible. It was very horrible. He was really good at messing up his own momentum, if you will. It was really bad. But his core message, in my opinion, was to get back to being first in everything. Because right now we're not in anything. We're actually, except for the bad stuff. I mean, we got riots because somebody gets shot. Okay, let's burn down a Walmart. That sounds fun. They just tried to riot over somebody getting shot because they were trying to knife someone. That happened this week or last week. A cop showed up to stop somebody, and they were called out to a scene, and this girl charged out and tried to knife someone in the gut. The cop had 15 seconds to decide what to do, and he just put 4 holes in her. But everybody quick to jump to try and start another riot, do another thing, and it was not what people thought.
Wish you can give police like some sort of less lethal, but like more like something that stuns the person, maybe, but
Right.
doesn't kill them. Like
we have
isn't there
they do
option?
have it. They have a stun gun, but it's one shot and it has cables to it. So when you shoot it, the cables both have to connect, and if they don't, then it don't work. And if they do connect, you only got one shot. If you miss, too bad.
So I want to go from a Chinese example here. So you've heard about the Tiananmen Square massacre, right?
I watched
That's
it.
when China started using rubber bullets. That's when China started having this kind of non-lethal ways of driving people away,
Well,
like with
they do that
water
with the
hoses and that kind of stuff.
they do that in the big stuff like riots and all
And
that
big
stuff.
riots.
Yeah, they use
But I
the
think
pepper
in the
spray
United
that.
States, if you have a more less lethal way, maybe just I don't know, blow darts or whatever.
You know what would be really nice is if they had. Did you ever see Demolition Man?
Now,
Okay, it's an older movie. They had this baton, a stick like this, and all you had to do was just touch them on the head, and they were out. It'd knock them right out. Make
but
the
you have to connect your.
Yeah, you just have to go and tap them on the head. That's easy enough to do, but the problem with the United
It'd be
States
nice
is,
if there's a ranged weapon to.
yeah, where it shoots a high voltage taser shot at them, but it's multiple bullets, not just one. That would be great. Somebody needs to invent that. That's great in ballistics. Unfortunately, we don't have anything like that, and the other problem here is everybody's got a weapon. I mean, this girl had a knife, but you don't know if she were to have a gun. Somebody else in the crowd has a gun. Like, I think the statistics is there's more guns than people here. I think that's what the phrase is. So, we have enough
It's
guns
gonna
for.
get harder and harder to control people owning guns. I heard in China people are just printing guns from 3D printed parts.
Doing that in the
Like,
U.S. too.
You can't ban 3D printers, so
Nope.
it's a big problem.
Well, I mean, technically
no
they
longer-
could because they're not in the United States. They could ban a 3D printer because it's not a firearm. But then you're killing a technology, and nobody
Yeah.
wants to do that. So, no, we got our own set of problems. But when Trump's talking about all that "Make America," whatever, he's not talking about making that stuff good. It's more bring our industry back, bring innovation back, bring all that stuff back. Because we're basically losing on every front, except for a few, and not just the bad ones either. I think we're doing good on like lessening our dependency on coal. We're not as good as Japan, unfortunately, because they went full nuclear, which is kind of nice, and France.
Well, Japan is having a very big problem with nuclear power right now.
Yeah, they're dumping it in the ocean from last I saw.
And so basically the nuclear power production in the last couple of years were crippled because they were re-examining all the nuclear power plants. So for years, some of the power plants just output no power at all.
Oh, wow.
And it turns out a lot of them are getting old and they are not being properly maintained.
Oh, geez. That's scary.
And so a lot of nuclear power plants are getting torn down.
Are they rebuilding, or what is Japan going to?
With Japan's current trend, in people's opinion, it's not gonna happen. They're having problem with just keeping the nuclear power plants open. So building more is definitely a political suicide.
Huh.
Unfortunately. And of
I
course, Japan is an island nation. We don't have a lot of land here.
Yeah.
So when you have a nuclear disaster that make a lot of land unusable, that's a big problem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you had a Chernobyl,
Same with
you're
Taiwan,
gonna. It's gonna
which
cure.
is also struggling with its forced nuclear reactor, nuclear power plants.
Man.
But in China, we have a lot of land.
Oh yeah. No, China's massive. Not everything's inhabited either. There's plenty of room to grow there. So, anyways, that's the only reason I disagreed. It was because I think his perception was to get back to being first at everything, and be in our mind's eye that we're better united than divided, and none of this diversity is our strength thing. It's more we're the great melting pot, and the way that was meant to be was we take the best of every culture and leave out the rest. So if we like a bunch of good things that come out of a specific culture, we adopt it, and then any of the bad stuff.
You're like the Borg.
Yeah,
You assimilate the final uniqueness.
you would not be if you've ever been around a few of the states, you'd see it. It's pretty crazy, especially the border ones like California, for example, you can drive down the street and see shops of every nation, basically selling
Mm.
wares from those nations, food from every country. I mean, it's usually a discussion on what style of food you want to eat today, not
But anyways, back
kind of
to
stuff.
the American nationalism thing.
Sure.
I can see your point now.
Yeah, it's a different. I think it's just different perception. But I was more interested um, on what nationalism means to somebody from China or from Japan or any of the other locations that have a more, I don't know, unified front, I guess you could say, because the culture is completely
Homogeneous
different. You
culture.
know what I mean? I missed that.
You mean a country with a more homogeneous culture rather than a multiculturalistic one?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Because United States is definitely uh, dimorphic.
More
It's
more diverse.
yeah, it's a hodgepodge of cultures.
Mm.
So uh, that being said, your view on nationalism specifically, just the concept of nationalism, would you be? Uh, I guess it would depend on how you would define what nationalist means to you. So from the perception of Eastern nations like Japan, China, and so on and so forth, what would nationalism mean to somebody from there, or at least how you were taught?
Well, nationalism, how I am taught. Let's see.
And since you have experience from not only China but Japan as well, what is the Japanese perception of nationalism as well? And be a good perception.
Could you go more specific on why America has to be number one on everything? Like,
Uh,
what does this achieve for people like in their everyday lives?
to give you an idea, beyond the ego of Trump, because that's why he
Mm.
wanted it. I'm
Beyond
100%
just
sure.
being number one, like,
Yeah, he's always got to be the best at everything. That's kind of just him,
mm,
right? But for everyone else, if you to take the policy of being number
mm,
one in everything, that would mean there would be more jobs here because everybody would rely on our technology, resources, and ingenuity versus other countries. So if you're looking
mm,
for a specific technology, like let's say, easy example, Microsoft.
mm,
The operating system was owned and developed here. We're still leading the forefront in ingenuity in that space, even though that company is
mhm,
a global company at this point.
mm,
Its home base is still in the United States. Most of the ingenuity
mhm.
happens here. As an example, Apple's another good one where that technology is here. It's used everywhere. Google was another good example of that, but
Mm.
they've kind of gone sideways on literally everyone, including hating their own creators. Um, but they're that type of technologies. Um, since we're the leading America, we're America first in that perception. That
Mm.
would mean the technologies we'd export or ingenuity we'd export, we own and dominate the market. We can charge what we want because why not? We're America. That's kind of how any other company would take the same a strategy or approach. If you have something that no one else has, you can charge what you think people will pay for it, and if nobody buys it, then you adjust whatever. But
Mhm.
that's the concept that he was pushing. Be first in everything again.
Which one would be more important? Is it like giving more people jobs or being the first? Like,
Well, it goes hand in
those
hand.
two things doesn't seem to always, like, if you want to be the best at something, you really just need a small elite team of engineers to do that, right?
Um,
You're talking about research, that kind of stuff.
yes
Like,
and no.
Microsoft doesn't hire that many people. You don't like need that many people to be the world's first, and you want to specialize into one thing, go really deep. That's how you achieve world first, right?
Well, to give you an example, for
Okay.
Microsoft,
Okay.
in 2020, they increased the amount of people they hired or had working for them by 13.19%. That means it went up
Okay.
from, in 2019, it was 144,000 people they employed. It went up to 163,000. Now,
Okay.
now, if they had all those jobs in the United States, there's, what is that, almost 20,000 jobs in the United States for people in the United States. And with the way this place is, you can literally just move across country. These
Hmm.
guys, Microsoft, for example, would pay for you to move. We
Yeah, but
have
Microsoft
relocation
is
assistance.
hiring some very specific talent. That's not gonna be just growing on trees.
Right? Yeah. No, they are hiring specific talent. That's true. But the point being, they don't have to export talent from another country. We're already here.
Hmm.
They're more likely to hire a U.S. national than they will
Hmm.
to hire somebody, say, from India, where they have to get them an H1 visa, bring them across here. They have to pay the visa dues or fines, whatever you want to call them, every 6 months. One of my
Hmm.
friends, I did a video on this not too long ago on how much it actually costs to stay here as a working on a work visa, and you
Hmm.
pay $10,000 to $20,000 a year alone per person to have them here.
Hmm.
So
So is it more expensive to hire someone from overseas, or is it more expensive to hire someone from in America?
overseas.
In the if it more, it's more expensive to hire someone overseas. So
Hmm.
why isn't Microsoft trying to cut costs by hiring from the United States?
They do. That's one of the few companies that do, but they're only located in a few locations. I think Seattle's one of them. So there's a lot of there's a office here in Houston that I could
Hmm.
go work for Microsoft at.
Hmm.
But they also have other um, locations in other countries. So if they're upping it by 13%, it might be in one of their other locations. Like they have a site in Israel, I think, was one of the places. They're literally
Hmm.
everywhere. So
Yeah, they also have a site in Beijing.
I wouldn't doubt
The
it.
parents are like, you should work for Microsoft.
Well, with the schooling that you got, that's probably a good idea. Because then they might
Hmm.
pay for your relocation. Then you can go anywhere you want. They have an office for.
Hmm.
Well, that wouldn't be bad. But the idea is, we need more Microsofts. That was Trump's idea.
Hmm.
He brought a lot
And
of the
how
manufacturing
should
home too.
we achieve that?
Well,
Now, how should you achieve that?
that's a great question, and not everybody was aligned on that clearly, which is why
Hmm.
Biden's in office now and not Trump, because he
Hmm.
he has his own idea on how to make things better here.
Does he want
Unfortunately,
more Microsofts?
I'm not thinking he does, to be honest,
Hmm.
because his first few moves have actually made unemployment go up, the cost of living go up, and the
Hmm.
cost of base materials go up. To give you an
Hmm.
example, we use a lot of plywood here, which is it's used to make floors, stuff like that.
Okay.
Since Biden took office, I've watched the price of it increase threefold. It used to be about $25 for a full sheet, which is 4 foot by 8. Um,
Why is it happening?
because now shipping it in costs more. The
Hmm.
production costs more. He basically destroyed our independence on a lot of different things, and it wrecked the industry. It literally jumped up threefold when he took office, and it stayed down the whole time when Trump was in office, which is, I don't get it. It just, his policies have changed a lot of things, and he changed a lot of it within the first
Hmm.
3 months by executive order, which, if you're not familiar with what an executive order is, it's basically,
Yeah,
man,
president saying do this thing.
yeah, it's a mandate. He's telling you to do
Hmm.
something. It's not going through Parliament. It's not going through committee. It's not going the proper channels. You just like do this now.
Mm,
It's very authoritarian to me, which is
mm,
why I was also opposed to, um, well, the nationalist view that he had. I think was very different with Trump. The nationalist. I don't think that Biden has a nationalist view. He's more of a globalist view. He'd rather see us working with the world as a community of leaders
mm.
rather than a community of competitors. And I also think that might be an issue, actually, because the perception with Trump, as far as his making everybody first again thing, was that we have always been a very highly competitive country, with ourselves and with others. Like our sports are probably ridiculous. That's the biggest thing. It's a massive moneymaker. I can't think of how many millionaires have come out of sports alone. It's mind boggling to think that they can go from you just play college football or high school football and you're a millionaire by the time you're 40. Millions of
Hmm.
dollars and all you did was play a game. or
Well, it
it,
only takes a lot of practice.
Oh, it takes a ton of practice, day in and day out. To be sure, an athlete's something to behold, but just giving that example, we're highly competitive in that because you're competing against your peers to stay on the team, and you're competing against other teams to take the trophy. And we're not we're team players, but only when we lead, I guess, is what Trump was trying to do. I don't necessarily agree with that, to be honest, which is why the trade deals and all that stuff that fell through, he was trying to bully his ways into them, like the Chinese trade deal, for example. He tried to strong arm China, and that's not going to work, in my opinion. China's not exactly the type of people that's you're going to strong arm them. They'll strong arm you back because they got the leverage to do it. But I think that's the point. The strength idea that putting America first is supposed to do just that is essentially the idea of what he was trying to push for nationalism and the philosophy behind it, putting your nation first.
That seems that sentence seems to have two meanings.
It kind
It's
of
one
does.
is you put your nation before other nations.
Yes.
Another, when you're talking about you want the United States to be the best at
Hmm.
things. Those seems to be two different things.
How do you mean?
Or putting your nation before others is like when you have a preference,
True.
like you have things when you can buy things made in the United States and you can buy things made in China, you prefer things made in the United States. That's preferring one over the other.
Right.
But trying to make United States the best is like when you try to have United States have to bet the ability to manufacture the best thing out there.
Right.
That'll be like two seems like a two different things.
To me, they're one and the same, in my opinion.
Okay.
Um, I kind of look at it like the Olympics.
Okay.
Um, you have multiple different competitions in summer and winter games, right? Doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
which one you're talking about, the 100-meter dash versus swimming versus whatever. Um, it's usually country against country.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of athletes, think of it as products. Who has the better product, us or them? That's the same concept. But putting
Mm-hmm.
America first means you need to all drop. You also need to drop a ton of money into developing said products here. That way,
Mm-hmm.
America owns the patents. America owns the well, technically the individual owns the patent, but it's in America. Therefore, duplicating it is going to be difficult. Um, there's a few products that we've done that with to be honest. Bourbon, as an example,
Like the alcohol bourbon?
the alcohol bourbon, you can only call, even if you make it the exact same way with the exact same materials and the exact same method, uh, American bourbon is the only thing. Everything else is a whiskey from other
Hmm.
countries. Here is the only place you can call it bourbon
Okay.
because it's patented. That's the first
Okay.
American patent of alcohol, I think. First and only. And it happened to be, we patented this. This is ours. Every other country has to call it something else. Another example would be something the UK has on postage stamps. You'll see on postage stamps from your country, my country, it doesn't matter what. You'll see that it says Japan or has the initials for your country, or China or whatever. In the U.S., it has USA and has a flag or whatever. In the UK, they don't have to do that because they invented the postage stamp,
Hmm.
and postage in general was invented by the UK. So um, all postage stamps from the UK do not have a location of origin. They don't have the where it came from. It just is says 2 bits or whatever. How price it on. That's it. Or a picture. It does not tell you what
Hmm.
country it came from. And they're the only country that has to do that. That can do that because they own the patent on postage stamps. So I think that's why I'm saying that they're one and the same. Nationalism is putting your country first. Simultaneously, you're trying to compete against other countries. And in the vision of competition, how do you know you're the best? Well, the only way to know you're best is to compete against other people and countries and nations to outperform them in whatever you're trying to outperform them in. Um, One of the good examples is Japan probably has a better education system than the United States by far, and it's culturally ingrained differently. Um, we've tried multiple methods and nothing ever seems to work, unfortunately. Like we have private schools, we have public schools, we have charter schools, we have all these other things. But if you look at overall like student performance, grades, and all that fun stuff, um, I think we're like 32 out of all of the countries, and Japan is like top 10 last I checked in student performance, grade by grade comparative averages. Um, Trump's envision would be to have us number one on that list.
Okay. What would, like in this case?
How to get there is a massive debate, but yeah,
Okay. But the goal would be to have them there.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm. We got a comment. We got two comments from Orange Banana Monster.
Yeah, he's I know who that is.
Orange. Okay. Well,
I think that's my son, to be honest. I know how he is.
hello. Xiao's point, one understanding of nationalism involves mercantilist economics. Your nation does better by hurting other countries. Another is just wishing your country well, irrespective of others. Typically, putting your country first, favoring your country, at least implies disfavoring other countries. And there's another on the education. Oh, Keegan, you know that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the other guy in that debate. In the debate when we are talking about the U.S. presidential election, he's the other guy. He's the guy who really argued with you. One of the guys.
Yeah, okay. It's clicking now. Yeah, my son uses stuff like that, banana
Okay.
monster and stuff. So I was like, yeah, I bet you that's him. Nope, guess not.
Anyways, that's the first comment. What do you think?
Let's see. I don't necessarily agree. It means dis. It depends on how you define disfavor. Like
Hmm.
America has a very bad history about talking trash about other countries,
Okay.
as I would put it. It means you insult them in
Hmm.
in whatever way they feel like. To give you an example, easy example, the coronavirus. Trump started calling it the China virus. Well, everybody called him racist for it because in their heads they immediately thought Chinese person. Trump's brain is similar to mine, at least in this one small, very small respect. As much as I don't want to be associated with him in any way, shape, or form,
Okay.
I refuse to give value to anyone's race. I don't care where you're from. It has zero value to me. That's the best way I can put it because when you start valuing something, you tend to prize one over the other. So if you remove value from the equation, meaning it doesn't have no value to anyone, then you cannot give a comparison on one's better than the other. Anyways, because he called it that, a bunch of people called him racist. What he was referring to was the country. What everybody else thought of was the race. And unfortunately, the way things are with going back to the philosophy that was introduced in the 70s, that's kind of ingrained in people these days. They hear one thing and think another. And so when he's talking about competing against these other countries or bringing other countries in, a bunch of people jump to the idea that they're talking about the demographics or the characteristics of people, and he's not. Unfortunately, he doesn't know how to say that either, so he ends up, once again, putting his foot in his mouth. I hope that's a new term you gained from me.
I don't want to imagine that.
Yeah, no,
Please,
it's a
what
gross.
are you doing?
It's
What
a
are you
gross
doing
vision
to
to
me?
put in your head, but but it is. I mean, that's kind of where he's coming from. It's where it came from, not who's involved. And
Okay.
that was kind of the
I
point.
would say this is kind of a problem inherent to American democracy.
It is right
Because
now. It is.
every side have to try their best to defame the other side. So they will find every single tiny excuse to say, okay, Trump is a racist. They will try to even if regardless whether Trump has this purpose, they are going to say that. They are going to try to catch every single minor detail to try to incriminate him. And it's I guess it's gonna be the same the other way around. And it's really just inherent into the competitive nature of American democracy.
Yeah, and that's probably to a fault
Like
all in its own.
the nicer side is gonna lose votes.
Oh yeah, completely. That's usually and unfortunately, that's how our system is right now. And it's if you ever played Halo, there was a show that came out of Halo. It's called Red versus Blue, and that's pretty much
Okay.
what we are right now. It's two teams fighting against each other, and neither one of them want to see eye to eye. So it's continually throwing stones constantly. They'd rather bicker than get anything done, which is probably beneficial for everybody right now because that means no laws gets passed. Basically, they get nothing done. I'm fine with that. They can stay out of my life. But
But what if you want laws to be changed? I guess this is different from people to people.
yeah, that's true. If you want something to be changed, to be honest, I think the best way they could approach it was with some epistemology. A street epistemology in particular would probably be the best way to approach it.
That would be nice.
But
But
unfortunately,
it really depends on the goodwill of the other person. If
yeah,
they aren't willing to open up, it's
yeah,
so difficult.
yeah. There's massive roadblocks right there just from the get go that make it so it's not possible.
I often felt this is kind of the limitation of street epistemology. Actually, it's like when you're a foot soldier, you're fighting 1-to-1. You can. This is a very effective method. But if you're doing a like mass media broadcasting, and if you're writing a blog, if you have a YouTube channel, even you're trying to communicate towards many people.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my god, there's so many comments.
Yeah, he's
We are not we are not catching up.
no, it's fine. It's just he's having a chat with me on the side too. So it's all right.
Hey, Keegan, we have to. Are, can we invite him to this
Sure, I don't
if you
mind.
want to?
I don't mind. Let me
Is there a way for you to invite him on this chat?
uh not from the chat. You'd need his hangouts if you have it. You could invite him.
Okay. Send me your Hangout or whatever email address on Facebook, and we can see if we can invite you if you want.
If you
If
want.
you want.
I mean, it is
If you
11
want.
o'clock your time, right? So what a
Mm.
year must be Pacific. So he's over on the West Coast. But
Okay,
all right.
let's read some more comments.
He's got some interesting conversation, that's for sure.
Mm.
So
The
as he put
U.S.
it, he's got the
Okay.
view that I was talking about that a lot of people jump to.
Mm.
Calling the virus a China virus implies that it's the Chinese people.
Can
That
we
Im-
please do this in order, please?
well, that's after the last thing I just said. He did. I mean, he was talking about where he got his account, and I was like, okay. Then he talked about the I don't see race, hierarchy of the race, but that's he was referring to when I was talking about how I remove value from my equation when it comes to race.
Okay, can we do
You,
the comment before that? I just have to like get things in order. Otherwise,
not a
my
problem.
obsessive compulsive not yet disorder is going to kill me.
Yep, that's fine by me.
Okay,
Where do you want to start?
U.S. education system isn't worse than Japan's simpliciter. Anyways, that's probably a typo. Japan does better on standardized testing, but worse on creativity and argumentative skills, and that's something I can get behind because, in fact, U.S. raised a lot of nice scientists,
True.
but Japan has its own fair share of scientists, but not nearly as many.
I think that might tie
Japan,
back into our combative nature here. We're
mhm,
very competitive, and I actually peer review on some journals, scientific journal. Um,
okay,
well, I guess I can call it science. A lot of people call it pseudoscience. It's related to psychology, and I'm a fellow for. I have a doctorate in leadership, which I study the methods of manipulating people to get them to do what I want them to. That's what I call it
okay,
because it sounds maniacally evil when I say it that way. But
yeah,
really,
it
what it
does.
is, really what it is about influencing others. That's the
Mm,
essential components. And to do that, there's
okay,
multiple different ways. But anyways, I
anyways,
peer
back to
review on
Japan.
there,
Mhm,
and everybody that submits, basically you have goalkeepers there,
mhm,
and I'm one of them. And we look for any reason whatsoever in anything that you wrote to throw it out so we don't include you in our journal.
hmm,
So it's highly competitive just to get your name recognized. Just as an
hmm,
example. So on the STEM science side, as an example, the vaccine. There was multiple people competing for that government contract to be the
hmm,
first out the window so they get all that cash so they could be the first to vaccines and be pumping them out to
mhm.
people as quickly as possible. That competitive nature was driven by scientists and scientific people. But that
And
that type of idea is kind of ingrained in, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, that's ingrained in our studies as well. Even our jobs are competitive because we're competing for a small cut in like the department budget. We're all competing for that. Like, say the budget got increased by 6%. Well, I want 2% of that budget on my own salary. So we'll compete
mm,
against each other in performance to try and get that little extra money. So it's a very it's very much ingrained in our culture. So
mm.
I would probably
In
agree.
terms of education, you'd say it's the United States more competitive culture that's
Yeah,
created more top-notch talents.
I don't know about top notch. I think we're probably better than most.
Mm,
Um, but I think that competitive nature has been driving a lot of people to try and come up to the top, and not necessarily all of it is good. Because you get a
Mm,
lot of people that compete, but they might do things underhanded. For example,
mm,
one of my biggest pet peeves about research and development is you'll have a PhD staff or a doctor that will be the one in charge of a project. And say it's a three or four of the people on the staff that actually made that discovery, they will get no credit. It goes to the
Hey,
doctor.
I am trying to invite Keegan. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. Let's do this. Let's see if he joins. He's using a student email account.
Woohoo.
What program are you using? Google Hangout.
Mm-hmm.
What's your Gmail or whatever? Yeah. Anyways, so in terms of education, you say it's more like a cultural thing.
Well, the competitive nature is probably a cultural thing.
Mm,
So I think I can definitely agree with him that we're probably higher on creativity and
mm,
argumentative skills.
mm.
Only
So
because we're very
I've seen
competitive
this
here.
political commentary. Actually, this is from a Chinese YouTube channel. The they kind of seen the same problem with China. So we raise a lot of like we are high on standardized testing, but we don't have a lot of good scientists.
Hmm.
And that he seems to see the problem as the education system itself is trying to push people down on the same line. So they're not allowing them to study further. There's a message from okay. He's trying to use Keegan's trying to use a Gmail account.
That
Let
works.
me try to add the Gmail account.
As long as he has Chrome and Hangouts, it should work just fine. Because I have it
Okay.
casting off the desktop audio, so
All
and
right.
and it's capturing. Oh,
I just added the Gmail account he sent me.
added unknown to Hangout. Okay, that works. Alrighty. So, anyways, I guess in that case, just as an
Mm,
example, talking about education, trying to put ourselves first.
mm,
Um, what's by which is our standard? Which is our
mm.
metric? How are we going to measure that? Um, I'm pretty sure Trump didn't have a clue on how he would want to measure it. I wouldn't doubt it. And the person he put in charge of that space, I didn't much like her either. I don't think she had a clue, to be honest. Um,
Okay.
because it was just all they were doing was trying to make it so private schooling got a piece of the pie. And not
Mm.
everybody can afford private schooling. So the more money you have, the better education you get, essentially, is what happens. So,
This is one of the actually Chinese criticism would be to American democracies. It's one the democracy has you have a democratic process, but you don't have democratic outcome.
um, that's because we're not a democracy. A lot of people think we
Okay.
are, but we're not. Technically, what we are is what's called a representative republic. So we do leverage some
Mm,
democracy, right? So I actually had this conversation with some people from the UK, or not UK, from Australia. Same concept. They didn't quite understand what the
the
electoral
system is
college.
not supposed to achieve what people want, but
Kind of. It's so in a pure democracy, you get what we call tyranny of the majority, meaning
mm,
no matter what happens, the majority wins, right? So if the
mm,
majority vote for one thing, that's what's going to happen. In the United States, that's not how it works. It's what also can be called the tyranny of the minority in this case, where the lower populated places have a louder voice than the higher, more denser populations. So a major
mm,
city basically is equal to farmland USA in
mm.
a way of putting it. So uh, in a true democracy, it'd just be um, a straight up how can I put it? Um, it would be a straight up 1-to-1, right? You'd have just one vote per person, and that's how everybody would want it. But in here, it's this particular county is what they call it. So it's like a section of a city and probably some farmland and whatnot. This particular county has 150,000 people living in it, just an example. And then this one city block over here has 150,000 people, which each one of those sections has one vote.
Hmm.
And it's done by population density, which is another reason. Like that gets into big other kind of worms, gerrymandering and stuff and whatnot. And there's a big old conversation there. But we are not a
Yeah,
pure
okay, let's
democracy.
let's go back a bit to how this influence political decision making. And so we can go back to education and all that. And hello, Keegan, you have your mic mute.
Yes, I'm trying to figure out why my video isn't working. Sorry about that.
Hmm.
Nice to meet you.
Okay,
You
well,
talk-
we're just going to go ahead with the conversation.
Thanks for joining. It's probably the third person watching this.
Yeah,
We don't get many
no
views.
say hi.
Anyway,
Nice to see you again.
Hmm. Anyways, so on to how making policies with education. Like how is this related to all that?
well, going to the conversation
Mhm.
on who's better at what, I think it's. I mean, in Trump's brain, he's a corporate dude. He thinks
Okay.
he's at the top, and in fact, if you watch the first like 6 months to the year of his administration, he tried to
Mhm.
run the United States government as if he was the CEO of it, and failed at every turn. It was epic to watch. It was hilarious because what he'd do is he'd try to tell like the Democrat side, "You need to do this," and they'd say, "Nah, we ain't doing that for you, dude. Sorry. Go figure it out yourself." And I couldn't help but laugh at him because that's what happened. And I was like, "Oh, that was an epic fail. Hope you enjoyed that." And he later had to learn that he had to basically negotiate with everybody. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
he decided to step in with the wrong foot, which uh, made everybody closed to anything it had to propose from day one. That's, I mean, even if people were willing to work with him from day one, he
Can we
pretty
go
much
back to how
destroyed
does
that.
the United States electoral structure affect the policy making and the whole representative
Mm.
republic thing, and how does it affect educational policy making that you
Well,
were talking about? So we can kind of move on to the next thing. And
sure. So that's actually pretty complex as well because every state
okay,
can effectively do their own thing.
okay,
And each state, all 50 of them, they have a few things that are mandated by the federal government. They have to meet certain standards and policies, testing,
mm,
scores, that type of thing. But in essence, every state can effectively run their public schools
mm,
and their private schools any which way they want. To give an example, all my kids go to public school. The Texas public schools cover U.S. history, but they also cover Texas history because Texas history has a lot to do with Mexican history as well. So there's a lot of overlap and cross there. It's
all right,
very, very unique, very different than saying going to where I grew up in Utah, where they discuss the Mormon pioneers quite a bit. In fact, Utah is
uh,
probably the one place you can go to church while at school, even though it's completely
yeah,
illegal. But I digress. That so with the public schools there's a school down the street. There's a couple of schools down the street from my kids' school that are private schools,
okay,
and these private schools they don't have to necessarily follow the state curriculum. They can do their own thing so long as they meet the requirements of testing and all that fun stuff.
mm,
And that's kind of how it is here. It's a hodgepodge with multiple different approaches.
okay,
But you do have at least some commonality between states of like what classes need to be taught, how many credit hours, that type of thing. But content can differ from state to state.
Okay.
Makes it a giant mess.
Okay, but how does policy making and all that things?
Well, let's say
Like,
that
that's my question.
let's say that we decided to go with a national standardized policy on education. They would essentially have to force every single state to teach the same thing. A centralized education, like some other nations have that, right? All the schools teach the same thing. There is no independent state history. There is no independent curriculum. They all have the same curriculum across the board.
Well,
Everything.
there can be like granularities of like freedom, like maybe everyone's math textbook is the same, but history can be different. I guess people can find
and
like
kind of like that. That's kind of the way it is here. But every state can have a different math textbook if they wanted. There's some standard ones, but no, literally you can go to one school and they'll have this textbook that's printed from this company, and then you go to another state and they have this textbook from this. They're both algebra. They may teach things in a different order, but it's different methods from different. It's whoever's on the administrative board for that school district decided. It's not standardized. It's decided at the local people's location, and where we start to get in a little bit of democracy, at least in the United States, the Electoral College in the local areas will decide who sits on the administrative board that decides what books go on to teach our kids per state. Like in Texas, I will have no say in what California teaches, but I can have a say here just by voting. Or at least choosing whoever and then going to meetings and all that fun stuff. But I can't go to Arizona or Colorado or any other state and try to tell them what to do because I'm not from there. They won't listen. I'll have zero effect on their teaching. I do see some video finally.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello.
Welcome.
Welcome.
I'm here with my retainer. About to go to sleep, but I won't.
You have a magnificent beard.
So do you think I covered education quite well from at least the U.S. perspective?
I
think it's pretty close.
I don't disagree with anything you said. I think you might have omitted the federal role entirely.
I don't think they have that big of a role is kind of my point, unless you go to college. I'm talking about like at K through 12.
Just keep in mind, the topic of this talk is nationalism, so try to stay on topic.
Yeah.
I know we are already pretty far from it.
Not really, because if you think about it, like what he's talking about, at least going to talk about, is the federal role, which is our national government. What their role is in education. And I think their role is actually quite limited thanks to the Constitution, but they still get their hands in there. One of the good examples that I can think of was who did it? It was I think it was it Bush Jr. that did Common Core?
That sounds right.
I think it was him. He pushed this thing called Common Core, which meant to change the standardized testing across the board for every state. And it tried to change the approaches of teaching things like math and whatnot too. But it wasn't adopted everywhere. Not everybody adopted it.
And how is this related to American nationalism?
Well, he tried to push that down as a national policy. So it was supposed to go to all 50 states. Not all 50 states adopted it.
I think you're talking about nationalizing something rather than nationalism.
I agree with Xiao that this is completely unrelated to nationalism. But if we want a more productive discussion, perhaps we should have a thesis or an argument as a discussion to agree or disagree with. Like just nationalism as a topic, right? But like
we are more of
a beneficial
exploratory conversation here.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Like nationalism. Let me talk about the history of nationalism for 50 years, right? Like
how would you define nationalism?
I think what we've been doing for the last little while is actually doing a comparison between nationalism as viewed from at least this side, and you'll probably have a different view of it than I will.
Yeah,
and then
Keegan, how would you
the East
define
Side. So how would you define
nationalism?
nationalism?
Great, thank you. That's where we should start. I Googled it. Nationalism.
Okay,
Noun, identification with one's
but
own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations.
how would you
But
define
how
it?
do you define it?
That is how I would define it. I Googled it,
Okay,
and that's how most people use the term.
I
the
find that
dictionary are like prescriptive. They are not like
It depends on the
they're
dictionary.
supposed to.
Depends on the dictionary. Some are descriptive, some are prescriptive.
yeah, I find that Google, its dictionary relies on Wikipedia, which is not a reliable source. If you
Let's
went to
Yeah,
not,
Merriam-Webster and
let's
whatnot,
not
but anyways, that's
go there.
semantics.
But Keegan
yeah.
has given
And
a definition.
it's wrong semantics because it depends on what you mean by reliable source, right?
No
But
academic uses them.
Oh my god.
so are we in an academic setting? And there are reasons. Now we have to explain why no academic uses Wikipedia, because you're kind of implying the information on Wikipedia is inaccurate or wrong. That's not really why academics don't use Wikipedia, right?
Well,
A
no,
big
that's
reason,
right. They don't use it
a
for
big
that reason.
reason why people don't use Wikipedia in an academic setting is because when you cite your sources, you want to directly show which author's paper you get those ideas from. If you're citing an aggregate source, it's totally useless to someone who wants to backtrack and find where that idea came from.
That's not why. It's because
Tell me why.
the sources and locations can be changed by literally anyone at any time with no control. That's why academics hate it.
I think we're arguing similar points.
Okay, let's go back to
Very
the
similar, yes.
definition of the nationalism so
Well-
we can make some progress.
Sure. So I went to Merriam-Webster because I tend to go
Let's
to an
not-
actual dictionary. If you wanted to do it, all it is loyalty or devotion to a nation, or the way they put it, especially, is a sense of national consciousness, exalting one's nation above all others.
Let's not try to have like one single definition of
I agree.
nationalism. Let's just say like everyone kind of have a. Let's talk about Keegan's definition that he had provided.
I think it's an interesting definition. I don't
Let's say
necessarily agree with it, though.
Identification
Why don't you agree
with
with it?
one's nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. I would say the first part, I would agree.
Yeah.
The second part, I would agree, but I can see people would disagree.
Yeah.
Like I personally agree, but I think some people would disagree with the second part to the exclusion or detriment of the interest. Blah, 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 blah. So they would
Wasn't that
say
exactly what
like you have one part is patriotism and the other part it would be nationalism and
Yeah.
but
Patriotism would definitely lead to that for sure.
for
Yeah, like if you're an absolute patriot, and we see these people in the United States all the time. We definitely saw them on a certain date that shall never be forgotten, January 6th. But they got their own set of problems, in my opinion. And
they got their own set of problems.
when you go ultra patriotism, that means your nation can do no wrong, right? And when you have that mindset, you put blinders on. You exclude anything that disagrees with that. It's similar to religious perception of their own faith. An ultra devout Catholic, for example, always assume that the Catholic Church can never do no wrong. Same kind of example. So patriot is a dangerous thing to be, in my opinion. Not necessarily a nationalist, but I don't think it necessarily requires you to be detriment to other countries, because that, to me, requires ill intent. And it's not always ill intent to try and be better than someone else.
So you would say you think it's fine that for someone to identify someone with their own nation and support for their own nation's interest.
Yeah, but I think there's a slippery slope there.
You would draw a line to whether you should do that to the extent of excluding other countries or do something to the detriment of other countries.
Yeah, and I think I'd put that delineation there specifically because it ties into the culture of that country. If you're trying to purposely destroy another nation to better your own. Essentially, what you're doing is making your own nation look bad. It's kind of like how can I describe this? It's like being in a sports competition. I'll go back to that because it's kind of the similar type of competitive nature that United States is. It's like trying to be on a sports team, and you're competing against another team, and then you cheat to win. So you purposely try to destroy that other team so that you take the gold. That would be the detriment of others, and in my opinion, that is also both unethical and immoral. A bunch of other negative connotations to doing that. That's why I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think that more aligns to patriotism. Because somebody that's an absolute patriot would do that. Their country can do no wrong, and they have no problem taking it out on other people because their country's the best.
I think I somewhat agree with you, except it's very interesting. I think these technical terms are exactly reversed. I think nationalism is a much worse thing to brand someone as. For
you, nationalism would include the part to the detriment of others, but patriotism would not include that part.
Exactly.
Oh, so the opposite for you?
So basically, you two have.
But this doesn't matter, right? This is actually a semantic.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a little semantics argument. Yeah, however, I think it's more philosophical than semantics, in my opinion, because where did you get that perception?
What your statement made absolutely zero sense. I've got to say, semantics. You can have a philosophy of language, and you can discuss semantics in that. Mm-hmm. Saying something's more.
Let's not go far.
Right?
No, not really, because I'm discussing meaning, not definition. Because you could take any word and it'll mean something to somebody.
Or syntactical. It's not philosophical, right? These are both philosophical. No. The language either has a syntax or a semantics, which you're discussing, right? Those are the philosophical, technical terms. Both are philosophical, right? It's not either semantics or philosophy. All right. Great.
We're killing it.
Please.
I just want you to speak clearly if you care about academic understandings of terms.
Please, just the goal here is not to define a term.
No.
If you want to make progress on discussion, sometimes when you discuss things with people, and they will have different definition of things. So Keegan, we are atheists, so we discuss with religious people a lot of the time, and this is a problem we often get. So religious people will redefine things.
Oh, absolutely. So listen to them redefine faith 500 times. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, so when we're trying to settle down on one definition, that conversation really is more of a distraction from making progress in the discussion. So what we usually do is just kind of just move forward with their definition of things. Just go to a more base level. Let's just stop using words like nationalism, patriotism.
That's just totally understandable, but at least one of you has now outed yourself as a hypocrite, if that's your view, right?
Oh, man.
Hold on. Just before you were saying that we care about academic definitions and understandings of things, right? I got hated on for giving a Wikipedia source. All I'm doing is presenting the academic orthodox view about what philosophy, semantics, and syntax means. Now that we understand that, we can move on. I just don't hate for that. I hate for not being rigorous, right? You can't attack both things.
You broke up a little bit in there in the middle of that.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit in the last sentence.
Upsetting. Anyway, point is, you either hate me for being rigorous or hate me for not being rigorous. Choose one, and let's move on.
I don't hate people. Well, I take that back. There's one person that I hate, and I reserve all my hate for that one person. And it definitely ain't you.
I assume you understand what I meant, nevertheless.
Oh, yeah. No,
you cannot both
I completely understand what you meant.
Non-rigor and rigor at the same time. Great.
Anyways.
What would you say are some characteristics of American nationalism, or like patriotism?
Interesting question. Um, I think I want to address the nationalism question and not the patriotism question, because the
Okay,
patriotism
and by
question,
nationalism, you are talking about to the detriment of the interest of other nations.
yes.
Okay,
Um,
let's talk about that.
I feel like I want to give a historical answer.
Okay,
I don't know how fun that answer will be.
okay.
Um, American nationalism has been tied with American imperialism for the past
Hmm.
150, 200 years.
Okay, what do you
It's
mean by American imperialism? Because I'm from China, and imperialism to me have kind of a maybe a different meaning.
maybe, maybe not.
Mm,
I mean, I could
just
give another
curious.
Wikipedia definition, or I could just
Okay.
give examples. So, manifest destiny is a great example, right? A spirit, a
But
zeitgeist
in
within the
the
American
what
consciousness.
aspects of manifest destiny would be an example of imperialism?
Uh, its practice, its actualization, and
Okay,
conquering land and
conquering
displacing
land,
peoples.
displacing peoples. So imperialism is when you expand by force, by military force.
So I wanted to give examples instead of the
Okay,
definition
okay,
because the definition is a
okay.
policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force, right? So
Through
it's actually a lot of
diplomacy
different
or military. So it just have to achieve the goal of expanding your influence.
things. Right. And you can be even more technical and talk about hard and soft power.
Hmm.
Um,
So you're expanding your power through whichever way, but and this power you are expanding can either be soft or hard power.
yes.
But that's just kind of just expanding. Just that's more like sounds like growing. If you have more factories, you an imperial? That seems a bit different. Like if you construct more factories in your own country, that doesn't seem imperialist to me.
Right. It sounds like economic development.
Yeah.
Nowhere in your example have you shown a policy of extending your power and influence through diplomacy or force, military force.
So you have to be diplomacy or military force. Okay.
Apparently so.
You know,
I
So
I
don't,
it
I don't
has
want to speak hard
to.
to this definition, but maybe we'll progress.
Okay.
I think a good definition to back up what he's saying is the development and existence of Texas. Be a
Hmm.
very good example because it was both military and diplomatic force that created Texas. It was
Okay.
initially they tried to buy the land, then that didn't work out, so
Hmm.
we fought a war with Mexico and won, and there is Texas.
Hmm.
One of the biggest places that everybody knows, at least in the United States, is the Alamo, and it's famous or infamous. Take your pick. But
Okay.
I think
I
that might
think
be
I
a good
have a
example
good
because
handle
Texas wouldn't
on what
exist without
imperialism
imperialism
is.
force.
I think I have a good handle on what imperialism is. Let's move. Let's move forward.
Okay. What does it mean to you? From the perception of, I guess, China or Japan or anybody over there, what would
Well,
imperialism?
I can describe my perception, but it's gonna drag on the conversation, so I prefer just hear more from Keegan.
Well, I can give historical examples of Japanese imperialism that don't drag on the conversation. If you want to look at Japan since the Meiji Restoration in the 1880s, 1870s, right forward through the end of World War II, was a classic example of imperialism.
Yep.
And I what was the original? The original question was about nationalism, and I brought up imperialism. So
Yes.
the other big uh, connection um, is with nationalism and fascism. Very, very related.
Hmm.
Um, and
Okay.
if you want me to explain that connection, again, I have to pull something up.
Cool.
But we can talk about that for though before I get there.
They definitely are related because the fascists of Mussolini and he who must might never be named on YouTube, lest our channel be struck down. Uh, He who must not be named, who had a very horrible mustache. Um, they both were ultra nationalistic. Their country must be first. Period. And they were very militant about that too. I would describe it as patriotic. They would push that patriotism down the throats of literally everyone, and it was extremely hardcore. And I can see why that perception would go that way. Getting back to where our conversation started with Trump's rhetoric and why people might see it that way, because that's kind of how it sounded. If you listen to him, he was all about putting this country first. The question was how, and unfortunately, I don't think he was capable of telling you how. To be honest.
Well, I mean, he certainly told you how he desired to put this country first, and
Twitter, I think it was more he told you his vision, but not the path. Like he was
exactly right.
He was horrible at trying to tell you how we're going to get there, but he's like, I want this, and everybody's like,
yes,
okay, what
he
is that? He
told you his desires plainly.
Yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately, right. Depends on the person.
Yes, there were no concrete plans.
No, there definitely were not. Well, no, I can take that back. He had what? 4 things that were his concrete plans, as it were. A wall. And I don't know how that makes you better or first, but I mean that was a plan, I guess. I mean, there was a few things there, and it was just he.
Okay, what's the second thing?
Muslim ban.
Well, he did want to ban any undesirables from this country. That was for that's how he would put it. I think. Well, no, that's how he wouldn't put it. He would just say he wanted people from what did he call them? S-hole countries, not to come here.
Shithole countries.
Oh my God! When he said that, it was like, okay, I won't say the same phrase again because you don't want that visual, but it was the same knee-jerk, disgusting reaction that everybody hated Trump for.
I mean, so we're going to list 4 things that Trump tried to do, and I think we agree. It's just the technicality of what we mean by plan. Like, Trump tried to stumble his way through some sort of policy. I don't think the policy was planned.
Exactly. I agree.
Right? So that's, yeah, we agree. Maybe Steve Bannon or someone was pulling the strings.
Can we go back to the F word?
Which F word? There's plenty that we can't say here.
Okay, the fascism.
Oh yeah.
F word.
Well, okay, back to that. I think that I can see how it's related to nationalism. Absolutely. Okay. But I think fascism is dependent upon implementation, not necessarily.
Ian, what do you mean by fascism?
Belief.
Thank you. Fascism. It's interesting. Well, by the way, just for clarification, Dr. G, what is your real name so that I can stop calling you Dr. G?
I call me what you want. Glenn.
What do you want to be? Glenn. Cool.
Glenn.
Right. So Glenn brought up the point that fascism is based on implementation. Right?
I think
you can determine, and that's interesting. That's fine. You know, I'm not going to 100% disagree with that. The issue with fascism is that it appears in different ways in different places over time, right? Ever since Mussolini coined the term, people have been trying to back reference different nations before Mussolini as fascist and nations that never adopted the term as fascist as well. So to clarify this nebulous term, Umberto Eco put out 14 points that are characteristic of fascism.
Please, no 14 points.
Yeah, I'll go really fast. We can go through them because I can explain how each of them are connected to imperialism and to nationalism. They're all interrelated.
Well,
the point.
I think the bigger point is even though they're connected does not necessarily mean that they're intertwined.
Inseparable.
Yeah,
right.
inseparable.
So in theory, they can be taken apart, right? A distinction can be made. But in practice, in reality, a lot of nationalists are fascists, are imperialists, and we can go through specific examples, or we can just look at Trump. You know,
but
whatever.
Let's say what would be the fascist characteristics that's most relevant to today's American nationalism for you?
You are not going to like my answer.
I am not,
Can you guess,
or
can you guess
Glenn
why
will
you
not.
are not? I mean, Xiao, you are not. Because my answer
Okay.
is all of them. My answer is every point of fascism. And then I can go one by one and explain it. So
But
first point
what would you say is the most
is the
important, most salient
uh,
point?
What's the biggest one
If
that
you
stands out
have
the
an
most?
elevator pitch space, how would you? How would you
you're
squeeze
not
it
gonna like
in?
my answer is all of them, and I'll go. Okay, so Newspeak. If you ever know 1984,
Okay.
they tried the bad guys in the book, the fascist government, tried to change how people spoke or
Okay.
spoke in a more plain language. So this is a quote. All the Nazi school books made use of an impoverished vocabulary and elementary syntax in order to limit the instruments for complex and critical reasoning, critical thinking, right? So your critical thinking skills is reflected in your language. So they go bottom up. They change critical thinking by changing language. The easiest way to look at this is look at Trump's, Twitter influence.
But he wasn't changing anyone's language. How is he influencing anybody else's language when all he's doing is speaking? Was he telling other people how to speak? Was he reducing the language other people could speak? And how? You're going to have to prove that because that's a false
Changing
statement.
things.
Will do. It's not a false statement. Will do.
He's banned, by the way, from Twitter. So how is he influencing people's language now when he's no
There
longer
are two
speaking?
ways to influence people.
Another
There's a
thing.
democratic way and the authoritarian way.
That's true.
The
There are more than
democratic
two
way.
ways.
Okay. There are more than two ways, but it is
Trump is neither. I was going to say.
okay. Go ahead.
Trump is exerting it's not democratic. It's not authoritarian. He's not forcing you to change your language. Like that would be a very hard claim to make, right? Trump is literally making me, and it's not a claim I'm making. Also,
to be fair, I think he did make a lot of people speak in ways that they probably didn't intend to, and not some were for him, others were against. But he did influence people in ways that were both positive and negative, unfortunately. To an extreme as well. That's the other thing I think is important to agree with you in some point, that the way he spoke was very, how can I put it and not swear?
childish.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, he was very very childish. Like, for example, when he insulted Kim Jong-un and said, "I got a bigger button and it works." I'm like, who? What? No,
Thank you.
Ew,
So this
that was retarded.
This is a premise in my point. You give me a nice example. So it's true that there are a lot of ways in which Trump did not influence people to change their language. This is a way Trump did influence people to change their language, to change their understanding, and then they reproduced this behavior. 70 million people voted for Trump. A lot more than that appreciate him, like him, identify with him. Any of this, there's a scale, right? Like, think he's doing a good job, want to be more like him, read his books, right? A lot of these people exist. Millions, tens of millions. These people look at his tweets and think that is the proper conduct of a president, right? At least some of them do. Others,
there's some that do, but I think...
Others may disagree. I know what you're going to say. So others may do some sort of utilitarian calculus and say, well, maybe he's not, presidential, but at least he's getting it done, or something. If I assumed what you're going to say correctly.
That was pretty close. Others, like me, thought he was just an asshole and probably shouldn't have said that. And there's a lot of us like that.
Right. So, but you could do a utilitarian calculus. You can say, well, he's an asshole. He's not presidential, but ultimately, right, he's doing something good. So you might not be directly convinced that what he's saying is presidential. It's still normalized.
I don't think anything he actually said was presidential, and to say it was normalized is far-fetched because everybody, and pretty much everybody, including the people that liked his speech, agreed that was not normal at all.
What do you mean by it's normalized?
Thank you. So obviously, I'm not giving the radical view that people think Trump's behavior is okay. That's not what I mean.
No.
What I mean is that the precedent has been set, similar to
President.
similar
Okay.
to United States courts, right? If Joe Biden were to do something at least 1/10 as egregious as Donald Trump would do, people would be outraged, and Joe Biden could justifiably say, "You people are being hypocrites because you were not outraged when someone did something 10 times worse than this. You were actually supportive, you were appreciative, right?" So there's a new norm, right? Trump set a new baseline, and a very low baseline at that.
No, I think everybody pretty much rejected the way he spoke.
Can we see?
Except for the
I'm not
extreme.
just talking about. I'm not just talking about speaking, right? For instance, the Republican Party failed to instate a Supreme Court justice during the last year of Obama's term, but did a 180 and put one in a month or two before Trump's term went up. Right? That's a new norm of hypocrisy. Right? People may think that's not a good thing.
No,
but
that's an historical
that's
norm, actually, if you look through the
That's
history
what
of appointing justices. But that's besides the point.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. Right. So all you're saying is if the norm of appointing justices was such that it's okay to appoint a justice a month or two before a president changes, then the hypocrisy was in the past. The hypocrisy was with Obama not appointing a justice then.
No,
Because
it's
you can't
deeper than
hold
that.
both, right?
It only happens when historically, and we're getting into a digressive argument, anyways. Historically, if the Senate and the House were, or if the Senate, I think it was, is the same party as the president, and a justice died, they just pushed it through. But if it was opposite day, where one is one and the other is the other, it never went through. And every justice, whenever we had that, and the unfortunate problem with that particular situation is the only time we replace a justice is when one dies or quits. So, I mean, that happening is like one every lifetime or two. So, it's really difficult to compare without going back 200 plus years, which is unfortunate.
I agree with you in the case that it does ultimately come down to what party controls the power to appoint at that time.
Yep.
Um,
And unfortunately, I mean, for better or for worse, that's pretty much what happened. Whether or not he's a good justice or not is remained to be seen. But so far, he's done all right. Like he kept in Roe versus Wade, which should be there forever. Things like that. But but we're getting off subject.
My only issue, maybe to bring it back onto the subject, hopefully, is to say that talk of power relations kind of undercuts talk of precedent, right? If the idea of precedent or law is to not be beholden to the current whims of the political fates, right? Whatever party's in charge.
Totally.
But claiming that, well, power is going to make whatever happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It makes norms irrelevant, right? No norms matter in that case because we have the power and we're just going to do whatever we want.
And the more power they get, the more they use it, which is that leads to fascism, actually.
That's interesting.
That's what I wanted to tie us back into.
The more pocket and the more powers in the pocket, the more they'll use it and abuse it, is how I like to put it. Anyways, I think back to the whole point of this conversation was to compare nationalist views. And I think what's interesting in this conversation at this point is we have two different views of nationalism and two different views of patriotism and fascism, which kind of ties into both, in my opinion. And then we got your view from the other side of the world, which doesn't seem to align. But what's interesting to me out of all of this is all three of us don't align. Not 100%.
I would say the idea of getting more powers through nationalism is a very interesting precedent we can see in China, because the Chinese government's power is kind of solidified with the national patriotism that it instills on people through education system. Because people are supporting the government because the government can feed them this nationalistic pride. And people are going to support the government's decision because they can get that kick.
Right. So that's a very mental that's a very psychological understanding of why people are supporting the government, right? And I don't disagree, but I think the reasons why Chinese people support the Chinese Communist Party is, I mean, there's more than one reason, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure I don't have to say them because you know the main reasons I would bring up.
Well,
No, maybe
No?
yes.
well, that's why you're here. You can tell us what. Do you know some of the other reasons people would
What
support
would
their?
you say?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I don't just want to be a historian the whole time, so maybe we could move on after that. But you
Okay.
know, the ability of the Chinese government to get its people systematically out of poverty in the past 30 to 70 years. So it's a large window, but I'm not entirely accurate with this date. Um,
But
and
yeah, that will be
the
one the Chinese people can see their own lives improving, at least for some of them, let's just say.
right, and even though some of them, it's many millions of people, right?
Yeah.
Um, Another reason, a very complicated reason that I will gloss in one sentence, is the the natural tendency of a one-party system to be hierarchical, subservient, suppress dissent, and basically it's physically impossible for workers' unions or for individualists, less so now than in the past, but still to a large degree, to operate with some level of what is the right word? Not philosophical autonomy, intellectual autonomy.
Intellectual autonomy.
If
That's
you're,
interesting word. Yeah, we,
it's
we
a
can
I
we
made
can
up.
we can definitely see this phenomenon. I think I can think of some examples would be so there used to be this rule in Beijing that all the shops on the street should have the signs with same style, which looks really ugly because every shop would have the same style. And
That's a mundane example, but true.
yeah, but Beijing did it, and then every other province started doing it. So they are following the example set by Beijing because they are afraid if they have any intellectual autonomy, they are going to be punished.
Right. Tell me what happened to Jack Ma.
Well, he's a billionaire, so
Didn't he get like arrested for a little bit and then just recently
yeah,
released, right? Didn't he
yeah.
get
And
punished?
well, the Alibaba Group got a fine,
Right.
which is
So
about 18 billion yuan, 18 billion yuan, which is about $2.5 US, maybe.
right. And I guess I want to back up a little and say that my claim that intellectual autonomy is stifled in China is not a claim unique to China. It happens in degrees everywhere by necessity. Um,
Hmm.
if I mean, I'll give another very mundane example. If you're in the Cold War era in America, you know, you are intellectually unable to be a public communist without being outed, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Outed is a
again,
nice word to use.
yes, it is. Again, it's a mundane example because it happens more subtly in the present day. That's just a very easy, obvious example of it happening in a capitalist country. It happens in countries of every type of system, right? It obviously happens in monarchies, right? If you go to Thailand, you cannot
Hmm.
criticize the president or you'll be arrested.
But anyways, I think we can I can agree with you. I can see that how a one party system would reduce the intellectual autonomy. So you can continue what you are saying.
Right, but I just wanted to say it's not just China, right? I don't want
Hmm.
to single it out. It's everyone to some
Hmm.
different degrees.
Well, I wonder if that's actually the case. Um, where let's take some other governments for example. We got, um, I would say the European Union might be a good example, or The UK.
Good. I can do it. I can do it. Okay.
Well,
So I
no, hold on a sec. To give an example, they got like what? In the UK, they have like I think 5 parties now. Is what they're up to, if I'm counting right. And then the European Union has multiple, but they have their own different hierarchy that makes a different mess altogether. There's other places that have more, but you'll notice that the parties themselves align on ideological lines to a certain degree. There's some that are just well off on the other side, but it's a larger spread, but it's kind of bent. Whereas the United States is, as an example, we have Axis and allies. We got one side that doesn't agree with the other. It's like it's like I don't know how else to describe it, but it's like a married couple that does nothing but fight. You know what I mean?
it's
There's
hyper polarized.
definitely some domestic violence calls involved. That kind of horrible situation. I mean, but I can see what you're talking about on both sides. But I wonder where, just to give a hypothetical, you might be able to find a synergetic mesh where they don't agree necessarily, but there's also not that combative nature. And I think bringing back to a conversation we just had a little bit ago about United States and our culture, better for worse, we're hyper combative. Unfortunately, that also shows up in our politics, which has been our detriment for many a long time. So, I mean, it's been good, and we used to have some house rules, as it were, for civil discourse. But it seems like that has gone away, unfortunately. I don't know when that started, but I can envision it being before my lifetime, unfortunately, because it was happening when I was born. So, whereas you have other countries that have just the one party, so it's who's there to argue with? I think you'd have more opportunity in the multi parties for greater discourse and intellectual autonomy than you would in a one party system. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Right. So I think I agree with the broad thrust of what you're saying. Right. What I was saying is that every country does it, and what you're saying is, well, they do it to varying degrees. Maybe a one-party system has less intellectual autonomy.
Yeah.
And I think totally, for sure.
It also depends on their policies they're written in, the laws they decided to go with, all that fun stuff, right? And their culture.
Yeah. Yeah. To make the final point, I don't think the abolition of this phenomenon of this stifling of intellectual autonomy is desirable. Maybe it's possible, but I don't think it's desirable either. And just to mention, I forgot the person's name. Well, I'll Google it later. There's someone who argues famously that even in a open liberal democracy, fascism, for instance, cannot be tolerated. So in a system where you tolerate all ideological viewpoints, the system necessarily collapses.
Yeah, the Schrodinger's cat of tolerance, right?
Somewhat, yeah.
I am tolerant of all ideas except for yours, you bigot.
Right. But the issue is, what if you don't say that? What if you don't say, I'm tolerant of all issues except for yours, you bigot? And it is true that the position that you were not tolerating is not only bigoted, but fascist, and believe that you have to gain power, whatever necessary.
Yeah.
Use the age or system that you provide for them.
You're breaking up
to
again.
You.
You broke up again.
Sorry,
on that
that's
point.
my internet fault. Oh well, yeah, you get the gist of it.
I think I caught most of it though.
It was Karl Popper, Paradox of Tolerance.
Yeah, that paradox of tolerance is a great one. I like looking at it, and when everybody says that they're a hyper tolerant person, I can't help but giggle, thinking that in the back of my mind. It's like I can say something that'll absolutely make sure that show you how intolerant you are of me. Because I have an uncanny maybe negative knack. I don't know how else to put it. Do you need a minute? We can.
Yeah, sorry, I just gotta be quieter.
Oh, it's time for bed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm in my study and I soundproof my walls in here for that very reason. Because it's 2 a.m. here, and that would piss off my wife and the kids. So actually, they're probably still up playing something. Anyways,
Yeah, it's a bit late. Let's kind of wrap up.
yeah, sure. I think endpoints. What I find interesting in this conversation, we did get a little bit of alignment on what nationalism is, mixed with patriotism and mixed with fascism, and how they all kind of they borrow from pieces of another, right? My particular view is that nationalism can be okay so long as you don't impose said beliefs on another person. I think that's my libertarian side talking there, that leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. But my interesting point to make in the view from your side was the nationalist view on from China is very much different because of the way it's taught, where our culture is very combative, and I think that was what Trump was trying to say, but failed miserably doing so. Whereas I think the view of the other is probably the same. They want to put their nation first, and how to do that is more important than the view itself, in my opinion. There's ethical ways to do it, and then there's ways to be a horrible person while doing it, which we have historical precedent for, unfortunately. Agree, disagree?
So generally, yeah, generally agree. I would, of course, change your definition between patriotism and nationalism again, but that's okay. So in my view, yes, patriotism can be good, depending on what exactly that means. I don't think nationalism can ever be good, just based on how it's defined. Yeah, so final argumentative talking point, nationalism bad. It'd be nice if that was the conversation. But also, we should discuss libertarianism at some time. That's a fun debate.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not all that big on libertarianism, to be honest, but there are parts of it that I respect and like. Mostly, I don't like people messing with me. Leave me alone. I leave you alone. That's kind of where I sit. But then again, I don't like drama. That's probably why. So, you want to wrap us up? Since it's only, 4 o'clock in the afternoon for you?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the conversation? Nationalism?
My thoughts would be you two guys really define nationalism in a different way. And maybe that's why you keep arguing with each other.
That could be.
I don't know. I think it was pretty easy to just say your nationalism is my patriotism and move on. So I don't think we often disagreed.
It's tomatoes at that point, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But if we are coming down to the more atomic definition of whether you identify with your own nation and support it for its interest, that will be first thing. That's definitely something China does. And the second thing, to the exclusion or detriment of other nations, that's something that China's trying to claim it doesn't do.
Well,
That would be
there's a factual claim to the matter, right?
Yeah, that's a
It
marvelous.
does not.
See Hong Kong. What'd you do
Yeah.
again?
that's well. That's again. I'm not saying China doesn't do. I'm saying China claims that it doesn't
Right.
do.
Yeah, I totally understand. It's kind of like the United States saying we don't meddle in other people's affairs, and then you say, "See Middle East." Since when do we don't meddle in other people's affairs? You lying.
See Central America.
Right? Central America is just as bad. South America.
For the record, Hong Kong is part of China, at least for the time being.
Oh, it is now, right? It was.
I mean, de facto and de jure, yes.
Yeah. They didn't have a choice. Anyways, I thought this was a very interesting conversation. Thank you for joining, Keegan and Xiao. I much appreciate it. It was very cool to see. I'm more center left. You're definitely more left than me, I can tell. So it was very good to have that difference of view. We need more of this, to be honest. We may have disagreed, but it's more important to have the conversation than just to call each other names, which is really kind of annoying these days. Open, fruitful dialogue and conversation's awesome. Thank you for bringing him in and taking part of your afternoon.
Thanks for joining us, Keegan.
It was
Yeah,
definitely
sorry
awesome.
I joined halfway through and crashed your party.
No, you actually were only, 45 minutes in? So we went another 2 hours thanks to you. So that's good.
Nice.
I think it was 2 hours. Yeah. Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
So,
started at 11. It's now, yeah, we went 3 hours and you jumped in first hour. We had to restart too, so that happened.
Okay. Al.
So
thanks
thank you,
for-
everyone. I'm going to kill the stream now. Thank you all.